Malcolm was 58, the proprietor of a quiet corner shop nestled in a tired neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that rarely made it onto maps or into conversations. His store had stood for over 20 years, not because it was trendy or modern, but because it was always there, unchanged and dependable. He didn't run sales. He didn't have a website. But people came again and again because Malcolm knew their names, remembered what brand of tea their grandmother used to buy, and always had the right kind of batteries behind the counter. The hours passed slowly on Tuesdays. By the time the sun began to slip below the skyline, the store usually fell into a soft hush. Dust floated lazily in the amber light that came through the windows. Malcolm stood behind the register, half listening to the buzz of a distant radio when the bell above the door jingled. She stepped in quietly, almost apologetically. A young woman no older than 30 with dark circles under her eyes and two children pressed close to her sides. The little boy gripped her worn coat while the girl stared around with a kind of wide-eyed caution as if unsure whether they truly belonged here. Their clothes were clean but threadbare, sleeves a little too short, shoes scuffed white at the toes. The kind of look that told Malcolm everything he needed to know. He had seen it for years, families doing their best with very little. The woman moved slowly through the store. She didn't browse. She wasn't here to indulge. Every step, every pause was weighed with purpose. A loaf of bread, a small carton of eggs, 4 apples, each one carefully examined, a pack of instant noodles. After every item, she stopped to glance at her hand, where a few coins and folded bills rested like fragile hope. She came to the counter and offered a faint, tight-lipped smile. Malcolm greeted her gently as he always did. He scanned the items slowly. The register beeped in quiet protest with each scan until the total appeared in pale green digits, 21.90 puns. The woman blinked. Her lips parted slightly as if to say something, but no words came. Her shoulders sank just a little, not dramatically, but enough for Malcolm to notice. He had seen that look before, too. She reached into her coat pocket and unfolded the money she had, a mix of quarters, dimes, and a few soft, crumpled dollar bills. $15.40. She laid it down carefully on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. I, I thought I had more, she murmured, barely above a whisper. Her voice was tight, as if she was trying to hold the edges of her dignity together with invisible thread. Malcolm said nothing at first, just watched her eyes flicker between the children and the groceries. She didn't ask for help. She didn't beg. But her silence spoke volumes. I'm terribly sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking, as she gently began removing the apples and noodles from the bag. Maybe. Just the bread and eggs will do. From the corner of his eye, Malcolm caught a quiet moment between the two children. The little girl, perhaps 5 at most, reached down and gently squeezed her younger brother's hand as though to comfort him. They didn't complain, not a word, but their eyes lingered on the fruit as it disappeared from the counter, slowly slipping beyond their reach. Without a word, Malcolm placed the bread and eggs back in the bag, and then, almost as an afterthought, returned the apples, the noodles, and quietly added a small carton of milk and a packet of cookies the kids had been eyeing from a distance. He slid the bag across the counter. Ma'am, he said gently, we're offering special family pricing today. She looked up in surprise, brows furrowed. I can't accept that. I really shouldn't. It's nothing, Malcolm said quietly, still bagging the items as if it were routine. Please, take them home. Her lips trembled. Moisture welled in her eyes. Are you sure? She asked softly. Malcolm nodded once. She hesitated, then admitted in a near whisper, my husband was laid off 2 months ago. He's still trying to find something, and his mother, she needs medication. The bills just keep coming. Her voice drifted into silence. No explanation necessary. Malcolm replied, his gaze calm, his tone without judgment. Behind her, a man in a suit next in line let out a sharp breath and muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. So what is this now? A soup kitchen. Thought this was a store, not a charity. Malcolm said nothing. He simply lowered his gaze and picked up a cloth, slowly wiping the counter. In practiced quiet circles, his hands browned by sun and years of labor moved with a patience forged by time, not argument. The woman gathered the bag with both hands and looked at him one last time. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse with emotion. "Truly." Then she turned and walked out to the two children hurrying behind her, the little girl glancing back just once before the door closed behind them. The man in the suit rolled his eyes and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved fast. He snapped a picture of the old wooden counter, Malcolm behind it, and the near-empty shelves. Within an hour, a video from the store, likely taken from the security mirror angled above the register, was circulating online with the caption, "Corner shop enabling freeloaders." Is this generosity or just bad business? Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, but many far less kind. That night, long after the lights were off and the store locked tight, Malcolm stood alone in the dark and quiet. Outside, the orange glow of the street lamps spilled through the window, casting long, stretched shadows over the worn tiles and shelves now half-stocked. He stood behind the counter, his hand resting unconsciously on a small plaque tucked behind the register, a weathered silver service star, nearly hidden between faded photographs of children and a much younger version of himself in uniform. His face showed no outward reaction, but his eyes, clear, steady, and quiet, held something heavier, something built over decades few people truly understood. By morning, the video had gone local viral. It was all over community groups, neighborhood forums, even picked up by a local influencer page. The comment sections were flooded, some praising his kindness, but many mocking him as naive, old-fashioned. Or worse, a local blogger wrote, "Wouldn't be surprised if the guy gets robbed next," basically handing out supplies to strangers. What happened to running a real business? The comment got hundreds of likes and laughing emojis. Malcolm's regulars, who typically dropped in like clockwork for their morning paper coffee or a chat, now hesitated. Some slowed at the sidewalk, then kept walking. A few crossed to the other side of the street altogether. Mrs. Gonzalez, who had bought her groceries from Malcolm every Wednesday for nearly 15 years, deliberately avoided eye contact when she passed. When their eyes briefly met through the window, she looked away as if she didn't know him. Around noon, William Harper, a well-dressed man from the local business alliance, strolled in. He leaned casually over the counter, eyes darting left and right before lowering his voice. "Malcolm," he said with a concerned smile, "friendly advice. I know your heart's in the right place, but this whole generous spirit thing, it doesn't work anymore. These days, people don't appreciate it. It just makes you look weak." And frankly, he added with a glance at the shelves, "It's bad for your bottom line. You can't save everyone." Malcolm gave no reply. He simply turned and continued stocking the cans on the back shelf, aligning them carefully by label. "Never tried to rescue everyone," Malcolm murmured, his voice calm but firm. "Just doing what feels right." "Right doesn't cover your bills," William replied, gesturing subtly toward the half-empty shelves. "Markets evolve. People expect efficiency, not sentiment. You need to adapt, Malcolm." Malcolm didn't argue. He rarely did. William gave a polite nod before heading out, leaving behind a silence that settled heavier than before. Malcolm turned up the volume on the old radio that sat near the register, a bulky vintage piece with a cracked dial and faded wood. The soft croon of a melancholy ballad filled the store, each note echoing gently off the worn walls. He hummed along quietly as he continued restocking cans on the middle aisle, the rhythm of his work unchanged. That evening, just as the sun dipped low and bathed the storefront in copper light, a delivery truck pulled up outside. Malcolm recognized the driver immediately. It was Andre, someone he had known for years. But this time, Andre didn't get out. He sat behind the wheel, the engine still humming. When Malcolm stepped outside, Andre rolled down the window, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Malcolm," he began, avoiding eye contact. "Listen, management asked me to hold your order. Just for a bit. Something about corporate image. That video's made it kind of tricky." Malcolm nodded slowly. "I understand." Andre hesitated. Then softer, he added, "For what it's worth, my dad served too. I think he would have respected what you did. I do anyway." Malcolm looked up at him, genuinely surprised. Andre gave a sheepish shrug. "I saw your medal a long time ago. Never said anything, 'cause you never brought it up." There was a pause. Then Andre nodded once and drove off. Later that night, after the doors were locked and the lights dimmed, Malcolm sat alone at the small desk in the storeroom. The silence seemed louder now, stretching between shelves and into the corners. He took a sheet of lined paper from a drawer and wrote slowly with a steady hand. He taped the note to the glass door before heading out. "To my valued customers. If my recent actions have caused anyone discomfort or concern, I take full responsibility. This store has always existed to serve the community with respect and dignity. That guiding principle remains unchanged." He locked up and walked home. Just 3 blocks through quiet streets, past shuttered storefronts and flickering lampposts. His apartment was modest, a single-bedroom space above a laundromat. The machines below rumbled faintly, filling the air with a warm, rhythmic hum as he stepped out into his narrow balcony. The neighborhood was settling into night. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Distant laughter drifted from an open window. Malcolm leaned back in his old chair, his fingers curling around the small silver star he kept in his coat pocket, the twin of the one displayed behind his counter. He ran his thumb across his surface, tracing the familiar grooves and dents. His mind wandered not to groceries or numbers or angry comments, but to distant memories, a sweltering desert, the pounding of boots on hot sand, the rough laughter of brothers in arms and quiet promises exchanged beneath stars that felt closer than home. Many had already turned away. More might follow. But Malcolm remained quietly anchored by what he believed still mattered: kindness without condition, dignity without applause, and a steady hand extended when no one else would offer one. If you believe compassion should never be criticized, share this story with the word hope. The following morning, the quiet routines of the neighborhood were shattered by the low, commanding rumble of engines. One by one, 5 military transport vehicles rolled to a stop along the curb outside Malcolm's Market, their presence sudden and startling. Residents peeked through blinds and cracked open screen doors. Children were pulled back gently by curious mothers. Mr. Lin, the barber across the street, stepped outside, still holding a pair of scissors. Even the teenagers, usually more preoccupied with skateboards and music, paused, earbuds dangling as they watched. Uniformed men and women exited the vehicles in precise order, forming a silent, formal line along the sidewalk. Their movements were sharp, respectful, and solemn. They wore ceremonial dress blues, their medals and insignia catching the morning light. Among them stepped a woman in a crisp army uniform, the same young mother Malcolm had quietly helped just 2 days earlier. Her bearing was proud, her uniform adorned with service ribbons. Beside her stood her husband, also in full military dress. Their children, now neat and polished, stood between them, looking up at the gathering with wide, curious eyes. A murmur swept through the growing crowd of neighbors. Is this because of the video? Are they shutting down the store? Is this some kind of investigation? And then he arrived, an older man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair beneath a decorated officer's cap. The stars on his shoulders, 3 of them, left no doubt of his rank. He carried himself with the weight of command, but his expression held something more: respect. Malcolm, as always, stood behind his counter, watching in silence as the procession approached. He made no move, his face unreadable. The general stepped through the front door first. He removed his cap and held it respectfully under his arm as he approached the register. The store fell still, the radio silent, the crowd frozen outside with faces pressed against the window. He extended his hand. "Chief Warrant Officer Malcolm Reeves," he said, his voice resonant and deliberate. "It's been far too long." Gasps rippled through the window panes. The general continued, "We've come to settle a debt, one that has been owed for many years. A debt you never requested, but we acknowledge now." The young mother stepped forward, her voice steady. "Sir, when I visited the store, I recognized your medal. I didn't say anything then, But when I described it to my husband, he knew exactly who you were. Her husband stepped beside her and gave a quiet nod. The guardian of Mogadishu, the medic who refused to evacuate. A wave of realization moved through the onlookers. The general turned toward the crowd, addressing them directly. For those unaware, 30 years ago in Somalia, Chief Reeves served as a combat medic attached to a ranger unit. When their position was overrun during the conflict and evacuation was ordered, he stayed behind to treat the wounded, knowing full well it might cost him his life. That act saved several lives, my own included. He turned back to Malcolm, his voice softening. You never spoke of it, never sought recognition. But the men who served with you, they never forgot. Outside, even the teenagers had lowered their phones. Inside, Malcolm stood still behind the counter. He hadn't spoken, but his hand had moved, resting gently atop the folded silver star he kept tucked near the register. For 16 hours, the general continued, voice steady under relentless enemy fire. He kept 7 wounded soldiers alive, refusing to leave them until extraction became possible. He paused, his gaze fixed on Malcolm. I was one of those 7. The small stores seemed to stop breathing. Even the refrigerators humming in the back faded into the background. Silence pressed in heavy with weight and meaning. He received the silver star, the general said softly, but he never wore it in public. After discharge, he disappeared into civilian life. Never spoke of what he did. Never asked for anything. The young woman's husband stepped forward, standing tall. When my wife told me what happened here, I called my former commander. The word spread fast, across units, across states, and we all knew we had to be here. Among the uniformed group stood another figure, the president of the local Veterans Association. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered, many of whom had come expecting controversy. Not all heroes wear uniforms anymore, he said. Some wear aprons and work quietly behind store counters. But they live by the same principles: honor, duty, sacrifice, every single day. Then one by one, each service member in uniform approached Malcolm Reeves and offered him a formal salute. And one by one, he returned them all with a practiced precision untouched by time. Reflexes of respect carved into him long ago. Outside, the gathering of neighbors who had come curious, some even judgmental, stood still, witnessing something far different than they had imagined. A quiet man long overlooked, being recognized not for what he sold, but for who he was. That afternoon, people streamed into the little store, not for groceries, but for something more personal. A young boy handed Malcolm a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing with a simple sentence scribbled across the bottom: I want to grow up to be just like you. An elderly veteran came forward and placed a faded photo on the counter. In it, a group of young soldiers in desert fatigues had their arms draped around each other. His voice trembled. We still remember you, Ed. I mean Malcolm, even Mrs. Gonzalez, who had crossed the street the day before, returned, her eyes glassy, her arms full. These are tamales, she whispered, for your dinner. And I'm sorry for yesterday. Later, a local news crew arrived. Microphones were raised, cameras focused. But Malcolm declined interviews. This story isn't about me, he said quietly. It's about remembering who we are to each other, about not forgetting how to be human. William Harper returned, too awkward, shoulders hunched, balancing a tray of takeaway coffees. Least I could do, he muttered, not meeting Malcolm's eye. Finally, the man who had posted the original viral video came forward. He didn't speak at first, just pulled out his phone, and before the whole room, deleted the video, showing the screen to those watching. I was wrong, he said, the words unfamiliar in his mouth. Malcolm said nothing. He simply stood, one hand resting gently on the medal, now proudly displayed behind the counter, no longer hidden among family photographs. For the first time in years, a faint smile tugged at his lips. The final visitor of the day was the general. He returned near closing time, stepping in alone. In his arms, he carried a meticulously folded American flag, which he presented with solemn ceremony. Malcolm received it with quiet dignity. For the first time in 3 decades, he stood not just as a shopkeeper, but as a veteran, a brother in arms, and a man truly seen. Some people walk through life never asking for applause, never chasing attention. They simply do what's right even when no one is watching. All they need once in a while is to know that compassion is still the right path. You might forget the story in a few days, but if no one shares stories like these, then the most important truths about dignity, service, kindness might quietly fade away. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories that remind us who we are.